My father bought real estate on Ladden Road in Greenfield. There was a two-tenement house and another big single house where Willie Hamilton and his wife lived. Willie was chef at a private girls' school. They were black folks, maybe the only blacks in Greenfield. We moved into one tenement. It was spacious with enough bedrooms for all of us. The other tenement was rented by a family with 3 kids. The father was an alcoholic who stumbled home from somewhere every day. I often went outside to watch him come home and stagger toward the door. There was a lot of land. Haley Woods too mountainous for homes, so neighbors were well away. There was a shed I jumped off the roof of many times. There was framework for a cabin. It still had a screen door, half broken.
So you were living in the woods again.
Willie Hamilton gave me an old crystal radio that was in his attic. He made me wait while he went up to get it. It was a treasure, to me. It was a wood box about 6 inches square and had earphones. There was an actual crystal on top, and a little arm with a needle that rested on the crystal. I found a corner to hide in and listened rapidly to the shadow. The shadow knows. And the Lone Ranger.
Too bad he didn't give you a TV.
4th grade was very boring, I think. I remember almost nothing about 4th grade, and I wonder why that is. If I remembered, I suppose then I would know what it is. I do remember that the teacher was a woman, and she made me read Hansel and Gretel, surprised that I had never read it. So, I read it. And that was 4th grade. I should dig out my report cards. My mother saved every one of them for me and gave them to me when I was an adult. I have them in a binder somewhere.
My report cards always got lost on my way home.
The family in the other tenement had 3 kids, 2 boys older than us and a younger girl. Charles, Vern and Verga. Both boys bullied us a lot. One day, they set up a tent in the yard and invited us in. The older boy explained sex to us and told me to fuck his sister. She spread her legs and I rubbed my little penis on her, but nothing happened. Then my brother shouts, "I wanna fuck too. I wanna fuck too." My mother heard this and called us in. She gave us quite a lecture about waiting until we were married before we have sex. That lecture somewhat inhibited my future sex life. One afternoon, 3 couples, older kids from the neighborhood, lined up on the ground in the woods and began fucking. Verga and I lined up with them and I laid on top of her. One of the older guys shouted, "Hey, look at those little kids pretending to fuck." And they all laughed. That was embarrassing.
You were how old?
My father ordered me to rake the leaves in the neighbor's yard. I couldn't see why I should do that when it wasn't for the family, and I refused. My father flew into a rage, grabbed the rake, and began chasing me. I ran for dear life halfway down the steep dirt driveway before he caught up with me. He hit me on the shoulder, breaking the handle of the rake in half. Then, he jabbed the sharp broken end of the rake at me and got me in the wrist. Meanwhile, my mother is at the door screaming at my father, so he stops. My brother was watching from behind the door and cried, "George is going to die. George is going to die." My mother bandaged me up while my father disappeared. A few weeks later, 2 dressed-up people visited. They stood at the door and talked to my mother. My father was at work. I was playing at a distance and wondered what they were talking about. My mother didn't invite them in, it seemed. She mostly listened and then she had some expressions on her face. After that visit, we didn't get hit anymore. Instead, we spent countless hours of our childhood kneeling in corners. We had to kneel upright, no sitting on our heels. After a year, my father sold the property. He had finished his apprenticeship as a watchmaker and was ready to open his own store. We moved to Ethel.
You didn't say who the dressed-up people were.
My father rented a storefront in Ethel, 538 South Street. He partitioned off the back half and furnished it as living quarters. The store had a gigantic basement, 2 stories high, and it extended under the adjoining shops. It had a cement floor. There was a lone light bulb above the landing halfway down the stairs, so it was dark down there. We 4 boys slept in 2 beds, one for bedwetters and one for dry. The jewelry store itself was nice. There were 2 glass showcases. The sidewalk windows had sides, because the entry door was recessed several feet. It was my job to spread the sparkly cloth over the wooden risers, and put watches and clocks on display. My father's workbench had the top enclosed in a glass box to stop flying watch parts from getting lost. The bench was near the entry, and to get the door from there, he had to go around the long counter. From time to time, Stinky Ben would visit the store. He was a little old man in a long, thick overcoat. Under the coat was his colostomy bag, and apparently it had been leaking for years because his overcoat smelled like a sewer. He walked into the store and immediately stunk up the place. My father would jump up from his workbench, race around the long counter, and prop the door wide open, laughing all the while. My father was upstairs repairing watches, and we were playing in the basement. We discovered a foot-square hole in the cement floor. The bottom of the hole was sandy earth. I suggested to my brother that we make mud pies, but with sand. This felt very daring, very wrong, and was plenty of cause to merit punishment. That was because everything we did was wrong and resulted in punishment. We began to make sand pies, very quietly, which was our first mistake. My father thought it was too quiet, so he walked to the head of the stairs and shouted, "What are you pigs doing down there?" I replied meekly, "Making pies." "What are you making pies with?" my father demanded. I couldn't think of the right answer. I said, "Not with sand." "Well, what are you making them with?" he shouted. After another pause, I said, "Not with sand." In the adjoining basement, which we entered simply by opening the door, was a warehouse for soft drinks and beer. There were cases and cases of soda, many different flavors. We improvised a bottle opener and drank a bottle each. I had orange. After that, we felt guilty and we only did it once more.
But, how could you make pies in the dark?
Business was good in the early 50s. My father would send me to the bank for $100 bill every week or so. I didn't know why, but it turned out that he wanted a new Oldsmobile, his first brand new car, and wanted to make the down payment in impressive cash. It was a 1953 Oldsmobile 98. My father let my mother choose the colors, white top and blue body. We took a trip to Washington, D.C. My uncle Julian was in the passenger seat, and my mother in the middle. Ah, big cars in those days. He said he could read the speedometers of the cars we were passing, and he announced each one as he craned his neck to look. He made my parents laugh. I wondered how he could see those speedometers. I got car sick and told my father I was going to puke. He ordered me not to puke. I puked, all over the back of the front seat, behind my father. My father swore a lot. He found a place to stop and my mother cleaned up the mess.
Well, you didn't get killed.
Our Oldsmobile destination was to visit Aunt Rachel, my father's sister. While my mother's family was all in one small area, my father's family was scattered around the world. Rachel lived in Washington, D.C. Her husband was constantly criticizing her because she liked to fuck people. She got that from her father, I figured out. I was asleep on the floor and suddenly I screamed. Rachel and my mother came running in to see what happened. Rachel had a giant cat, probably over 15 pounds, and it had jumped on my belly and I screamed myself awake. Throughout my childhood, one of my father's litanies was, "You're a bum, you'll always be a bum." I didn't believe it. I knew I was smart. All I had to do was leave the family, which I couldn't do. I had to wait. I grew 7 inches taller the summer before my senior year, and most of the bullying stopped. I was 16 when I left for college, suddenly grateful that I was 2 years ahead of where I might have been if I hadn't started school a year early and skipped 2nd grade. This was after a childhood of being bullied by classmates throughout my school years. The freedom I felt upon leaving home was intense.
Well, you've been everything else, so why not include bum?
Mr. Bryant told my father about a house that was being auctioned off. It was a tiny old shacky house in a neighborhood of about 50 houses, 2 miles away. Together, they went to the auction. My father bid $1,000. Mr. Bryant bid $1,100. My father bid $1,200 and he won the auction. Later, he asked Mr. Bryant, "Why did you bid against me?" Mr. Bryant said, "I wanted to make sure it would sell. It was a great place to live, especially after living in that dark enormous basement. There was a stream behind the house and a chicken coop on the other side of the stream. The kitchen sink had a hand pump that drew water from the stream. The toilet flushed with a bucket of water. Bath water was heated on the stove. The attic was divided into 3 bedrooms, 2 of them tiny. My parents' room, which included a watchmaker's bench, was downstairs. The chicken coop was at the bottom of a long, steep hill. It became my headquarters. One day, my father brought home an old typewriter. The first thing I typed was my full name. It was thrilling to see my name in print like that. I typed up membership cards for my buggy club and attempted to sell them to the neighbor kids, but no such luck. My father bought the land across the road and had an artesian well drilled there, so now we had running water. It ran all the way from the well to the house, quite a distance. It was next to the road, so maybe my father wanted people to see it because he bragged about it a lot. My mother was in the bathtub when a water pipe broke in the basement. She panicked and shouted for me. She opened the bathroom door and stood there naked and told me to find out what happened. She was lovely, beautiful. I went to the basement and turned off the water. I wanted 50 cents to buy a harmonica book, and I asked my father, meekly. He got his shoe polish and brush and shouted, "Go out there and earn 50 cents. There were no shoeshine boys in Athol. In Boston, sure, but not here. I had been given a military-style order to be the first one. I felt shamed and very embarrassed. But I had no choice about it. I brought a chair out and placed it at the head of the steep alley between my father's shop and Mr. Bryant's hotel next door. The shoe polish was brown, so I first looked to see if the shoes passing by were indeed brown before I said, "Shine, mister?" All shoes were either brown or black in those days, with laces. Then it happened. A man said yes. I sat him in the chair, kneeled, put one shoe on my thigh, brushed it off, applied polish with my bare hand, and brushed until it was shiny all over. I earned a dime. It took all afternoon, but I earned 50 cents and raced to the music shop for my harmonica book. A week before, I had purchased a plastic harmonica for 10 cents. It had the blow and suck instructions for playing America on the package, so that was the first song I learned to play. My father played harmonica very poorly, and I knew I could learn to play a lot better than him. I'm sure he never read the instructions on the back of a harmonica box. The shop next door sold liquor. They had a boxer dog, Rex, that was much too friendly to be a guard dog, but at least he was big. Between shoe shines, I played harmonica and Rex sat next to me and howled melodiously. People would stop and watch. I shined shoes for 4 years, and by that time there were several other boys who copied my example. I built a shoeshine box for my industrial arts project in 7th grade. It fit the carrier on the back of my bike. On Saturdays, I rode 2 miles to the uptown area and shined shoes at my friend Angelo's father's bar. Angelo's father was very friendly to me. Other bars kicked me out, but I was welcome here. I shined shoes all day long until I had earned $4. I gave this money to my mother for groceries and felt proud that I was helping out. It was a steep trip, but it was a great ride going back home. One time, a car followed me down the hill, then stopped me and said, "Do you know how fast you were going?" 35. Mr. Bryant was a quiet old man. He spoke softly and never had a worry. Of course, he was rich. I set up shop at the alley. Mr. Bryant wanted a shoe shine. He was wearing white bucks, suede white shoes. I had never done white shoes before. I raced around the corner to the cobbler and bought a bottle of white liquid polish. I dusted off the shoes and began applying the liquid. It turned the white to gray, so I put some more on. Then some more. Soon, there was white polish dribbling down the sides of my shoeshine box and running down the alley. I used up the entire bottle, and this was on only one shoe. I gave up and told Mr. Bryant that I was sorry. He quietly got up and walked to the hotel. One shoe squished as he walked and left a white footprint on the sidewalk. It looked like the trail of a one-legged man.
Hee hee.